Good morning. I'm Tamara Shoemaker. Fire this morning. Just going to talk about it. Fire and I have a fraught relationship. My brother showed me early on how you could pass your finger through a candle flame without hurting yourself, and I thought that was pretty cool. So I tried it, and I accidentally knocked over the candle, and it fell on the table, and I spilled hot wax on myself, which hurt. So I didn't really do that again. That one. Once our wood stove kicked out a large flaming ember through its open vent, which landed on the carpet, and it started to kindle right next to my legs. So rather than, heroically saving my family and removing them from danger and stomping it out or whatever, I fled from the room. I ran out of the house, went to the mailbox where our family meeting place was in case of fire, and my family stayed inside while my dad calmly took care of the situation, the burned spot on the carpet. Once during a Christmas dinner, that we had made really festive by candles and decorations on the table, my mom leaned over to put a casserole dish on the tablecloth on a trivet. She got too close to a flaming candle and she caught her dress, and I saw the fire come up off the material, and I shrieked and I ran out of the house to that same silly mailbox. I don't have time to mention the bacon grease fire that nearly caught our cabinets above the stove, or the spark that sank through our air mattress and basically exploded it, or the many times that I knocked over lit candles onto paper plates. And you'd think we would have learned by that point not to keep candles in the house. Anyway, or both times that I watched a gas fire from my parents' cook stove, their camping cook stove, catch, or not really catch, but explode off of the stove and hit the tent behind my mom's head, singed her hair pretty good, but burned a hole through the tent. So whatever guardian angels were watching out for my mom, that's great. So when I became a camp counselor at Spruce Lake during the summer of 2001, I learned a lot about the construction of fire. We counselors were supposed to make a morning fire every morning to cook a meal or a breakfast meal for our campers. Morning in, morning out, didn't really matter the weather. You just learned to do it. So I learned the importance of keeping dry kindling on hand, having oxygen at the root of the fire, the best ways to lay a fire for the most oxygen flow, and how to keep a fire going even in the middle of a downpour. What I didn't learn, and I would gladly have done without this lesson, but I do see its importance, is the destructive and powerful nature of uncontrollable fire. So fast forward a few years. My husband, perhaps imagining the awful consequences of our children thinking it would be fun to toss gasoline onto a fire and see what happened, decided to show the kids the result of this in a controlled environment so that they could understand that you never, ever, 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 ever play with gasoline. So my husband laid a fire in our backyard fire pit, and he ran a hose out to the backyard. He put some buckets of water nearby just in case, He laid a small fire in the fire pit, but he didn't light it yet. And he poured a little bit of gasoline over it, and then he dribbled this long trail from the fire pit in an extended line through the whole backyard so that he could safely light the fire from a distance. Then he put the gas can back in the shed, and he called the kids out, and me too, for the demonstration. And he said something along the lines of, "This, kids, is something you don't ever take for granted. Never mess with gasoline and fire at the same time." And so then he got out his match, and he was getting ready to light the fire. So we all expected a trail of fire to run, really rapidly through the grass, hit the fire pit, and sort of billow into a decent campfire, right? But none of us, my husband included, expected the explosive force of what happened, of spark to gasoline. It knocked my husband backward from the launch point and threw him several feet. The fire moved so fast we almost didn't see its progress, and the fire didn't just billow when it hit the fire pit. It mushroomed above our shed. And there was this bare earth, blackened trail that ran from where my husband had lit the fire, the gasoline, all the way across the backyard to the fire pit. Freaked us all out. And our lesson was learned. Gasoline is a big nope. Big, big nope, nope, nope. The funny thing was that lesson took place, took place several years ago, and that trail that was left over from the fire that burned through the grass is still there. You can still see it. It hasn't completely grown back. It left its scar far, far longer than we ever foresaw. So yesterday, I managed to get through James chapter 3, verses 1 and 2. I had intended to go through 12 yesterday. Didn't happen. but I got there today. So James is talking about the tongue, which is that little flippity flap gadget that sits in our mouth and talks all day long, right? Yesterday I talked about active listening. Today it's the other side of active listening. It's now talking. So talking, it's more than simply the vocal cords moving and the sound waves vibrating right through the air every time we open our mouths. We wield a lot of power when we let the words come out. Voltaire once said, and you may have heard this from a more recent source if you watch Marvel movies, with great power comes great responsibility. James uses quite a few metaphors in this passage. He talks about a horse that moves in accordance with a tiny, in comparison to the animal, a tiny metal bit that's shoved into his mouth. A massive ship sails through the waters, steered by a small rudder. An entire forest burns up by the strength of one single little spark. James 3:6 says the tongue is also a fire, a world of evil among the parts of the body. It corrupts the whole person, not just the mouth. It sets the whole course of his life on fire, not just that moment in time, and is itself set on fire by hell. The enemy uses even Christians for his purposes if we let him. So James isn't pulling any punches here. He's got all sorts of wallops in this passage, right? No man can tame the tongue. It is a restless evil, full of deadly poison. Your words are like gasoline fire. The effect they have surprises, perhaps shocks even you. I found this to be true one time. Well, probably more than once, but this is the time I'm thinking of. Once, my brother and I were arguing when we were kids, and as these things go, our tempers escalated and our words followed suit until in a single moment I snapped and I said, "I wish I had had my other brother instead of you." And I was referring to a miscarriage my mother had had before I was born. Ironically, if that baby had lived, I would never have existed because of timing. But can you feel the awful weight of those words? I still can. I hear them ringing in my head even now. Even as soon as they slipped out of my mouth, I felt awful. But the words were out, and they were out of my control. And there was this silence that was sickening, and I could see and feel the hurt on my brother's face. And I still cringe over it. I might have been 8 or 9 when I spoke those words. I'm 41 now, and I remember the really just gross, poisonous silence like I just said them. I did apologize later, and it wasn't a mumbled, sorry. I really did mean it. But the damage I'd inflicted was still there. And the thing was, those words didn't just damage my brother. They damaged me too. I'd lit the spark, but the resulting fire had thrown us both backward and burned each one of us. Paul in 2 Corinthians 12 warns the church in Corinth about the tongue and its dangers. I fear that there may be quarreling, jealousy, outbursts of anger, factions, slander, gossip, arrogance, and disorder. 2 Corinthians 12:20, he says, to the church. Did you get that? Paul says that he fears that he will find quarreling, outbursts of anger, factions, slander, gossip, arrogance, and disorder among the people of God, among the same people instructed to love the Lord our God with all our hearts, all our souls, all our minds, and all our strength, and to love our neighbors as ourselves. James says, with the tongue we praise our Lord and Father, and with it we curse men who have been made in God's likeness. Out of the same mouth come praise and cursing. My brothers, this should not be. Can both fresh water and salt water flow from the same spring? Can a fig tree bear olives or a grapevine bear figs? Neither can a salt spring produce fresh water. He lines his thoughts up with what he's been preaching in the whole chapter before this. Faith with feet. Not that we won't ever make mistakes, right? Not that we won't ever allow a blistering word to slip from between our lips, but if we, the people who claim to follow God, are quarreling with each other, being jealous of each other, throwing temper tantrums, dividing, taking sides, talking behind one another's backs, claiming I'm right and you're not, and generally causing disorder among our ranks, we've lit the gas fire, and all of us are thrown back because it is out of control, out of our control. So here's for consideration. The church is not supposed to fight like the world does, right? I'm not talking about military. I'm not talking about NATO or UN or DHS or anything like that. I'm talking about Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, comment sections below articles. Do these sound familiar? Because most of us won't fight face to face, right? We sit behind our keyboards or our phones and we stand at a distance and we toss our sparks at the end of the trail of gasoline, way too often forgetting that gasoline is still a force to be reckoned with, and we're not prepared for the fallout. Here's what Paul has to say about Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, comment sections, and keyboard warriors in the church, despite the fact that he knew nothing at all about social media. For though we live in the world, we do not wage war as the world does. The weapons we, that's us, the church, fight with are not weapons of the world. On the contrary, they, the weapons we fight with, have divine power to demolish strongholds. We demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God. And we take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ. 2 Corinthians 10, 3-5. So, this is the word the Holy Spirit gave me this morning to give to the church. Don't fight the wrong battle. Don't light the wrong fire. Don't use arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God to fight the exact same thing. Our battle is a higher battle. It's a battle that we can't see with our physical eyes, but it's just as real and more deadly than the annihilation that happens in the comment threads of social media. We should not be tossing our matches at a gasoline pit in our anger. Instead, let's turn our attention and our energy and our focus towards taking captive every thought, watching every time we open our lips and get that flippity-flap muscle in our mouths, ready to speak, centering our hands over our keyboard and typing out response to commenter X, Y, or Z. Who's struggled with this? I know I have. And sometimes I've lost the battle. I've deleted those comments, but internet never forgets, y'all. There's still a burned line tracing through the memories of some people where I've tossed the match without consideration. So here's the fire we, the church, must pay attention to. Therefore, since we are receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken, let us be thankful and so worship God acceptably with reverence and awe, for our God is a consuming fire. That's Hebrews 12, 28 and 29. So if you get a chance today, Google Third Days, Our God is a Consuming Fire, or just Consuming Fire. It's one of my favorites that I grew up listening to, but it has some powerful words to say to that. I hope you have a great day. I'll see you later.